They say betrayal usually comes quietly. But mine arrived as a sting acro ss my cheek, in front of people half my age, delivered by the girl who married my only son. And she didn't know someone was watching, someone who would change everything. And if you're watching this, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Because the story I'm about to share isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who has been silenced, humiliated, or pushed aside. Only to rise again with wisdom sharper than revenge. I'm 58 years old now. And I've lived through enough storms to read the clouds before the rain even thinks of falling. But I wasn't always this calm. No. I learned calmness the hard way, through fire, loss, shame, and the kind of betrayal that breaks the spine of your spirit before forcing you to build a new one. This story begins in our suburban neighborhood of Maplebridge, a place where people wear smiles like masks, and every house has two faces, one for the world, one for the family inside. Mine was no different. I raised my son, Aldrich, alone after his father passed when Aldrich was 13. Cancer. A 6-month storm that tore through our life like a tornado, leaving memories scattered and grief embedded in every corner. Aldrich was my miracle after that. He pushed me to smile when I forgot how. He grew into a man with a kind heart, a steady mind, and a way of making everyone around him feel lighter. But even the strongest men have blind spots. And Aldrich's blind spot was named Marceline Voss, my daughter-in-law. Marceline wasn't evil. No. Evil is loud. Predictable. She was something more dangerous, beautifully disguised selfishness. She was raised in a family where appearances mattered more than empathy, and where having money wasn't half as important as convincing everyone you had more. She had charm. She had elegance. She had ambition. And she had Aldrich tightly wrapped around her manicured little finger. At first, I didn't mind. He loved her. And she, well, she tolerated me politely. A polite tolerance is still a kind of peace, so I accepted it. But polite tolerances have expiration dates. And mine ran out the day she slapped me. It was a bright Saturday afternoon, the kind that tricks you into believing nothing bad can happen under such a perfect sun. Marceline had invited her friends over for a casual social tea, which, for her, meant a Pinterest-worthy display, designer platters, coordinated outfits, and conversations rehearsed like theater. I wasn't originally invited. In fact, she told Aldrich she didn't want to stress me. But he insisted. Mom should come. She's family. So, I went. Not for her. For him. When I arrived, everything felt curated. The women were all in their early 30s, dripping in expensive handbags and cosmetic procedures. They looked at me the way one might look at an antique chair, nice to appreciate from a distance, but not something you'd choose for your own living room. Still, I smiled. I knew where I stood. I didn't need to belong. Or so I thought. That IT happened in the kitchen. A simple, harmless moment, at least, that's what I believed. One of her friends complimented the table's setup and jokingly said, "Wow, Marcy. You're like the mom of the group." Marceline laughed with her hand over her mouth, the way she does when she's pretending to be modest. I smiled and said, softly, "Who knows? Maybe soon you'll actually be one." I didn't mean anything by it. I didn't know Marceline had been secretly struggling to conceive. I didn't know she had been hiding it from her friends. I didn't know she felt embarrassed by it. But she knew exactly what she felt. Hard enough to silence the music. Hard enough to remind me, painfully, that motherhood doesn't always shield you from disrespect. Her friends gasped. One dropped her mimosa glass. And Marceline, breathing heavily, spat. You embarrassed me. Do you ever think before you speak? This is why I hate bringing you around my friends. Her voice sliced through the room like a serrated knife. My eyes watered. Not from the slap, but from the realization that she meant every word. Aldrich wasn't there yet. He had gone to pick up some extra pastries. But someone else was watching. Someone whose presence changed everything. I didn't see him at first. Not until his voice drifted from the archway leading into the dining room. Is this how you treat Aldrich's mother? The women turned, startled. Standing there was Dorian Crestwood, our neighbor, a quiet widower in his early 60s, known for tending his garden at sunrise and offering gentle smiles to anyone crossing his path. Dorian had been delivering a tray of homemade lemon bars for the gathering. He ended up witnessing a moment meant to humiliate me. His expression wasn't anger. It was disappointment. The heavy, aching kind usually reserved for people you believe should know better. Marceline froze. Her face drained of its self-righteous fire. Dorian walked in slowly, put the tray down, and said, "In my whole life, I've never seen a woman strike the mother of her husband. I don't know what she said, but nothing justifies that." And then he did something that broke me inside. Something no one had done for me in years. He looked at me, gently placed his hand on my shoulder, and said, "Come on, Serafina. You don't need to stay here another minute." But I didn't leave. Not yet. Because leaving would have meant surrender. "Mom, who did this to you?" Marceline stepped forward and lied so convincingly that even I felt dizzy. She slipped. The counter corner hit her face. And the women, wanting to maintain their polished surfaces, their social harmony, their curated little universe. They nodded. They agreed. They lied for her. I could have exposed her. I could have screamed the truth. I could have destroyed her reputation in one sentence. But something inside me whispered, "Not yet. Not like this. There will be a day. And when it comes, justice will be poetic and earned." So I said nothing. Not because I was weak. But because I had learned through life that timing is everything. Justice without timing is just noise. That night, I sat alone in my small guest room, the house dark and silent. The sting on my cheek had faded, but the bruise inside me hadn't. Then my phone buzzed. A message. From Dorian. "If you ever need help with anything, remember that not everyone is blind." Those simple words were the beginning of something unexpected. A shift, a chain reaction. A quiet spark slowly growing into a wildfire of revelation, justice, and redemption. Because the truth always has a way of resurfacing. And when it does, it pulls everything else with it: secrets, lies, betrayals, and poetic consequences. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of pain, not because of anger, but because my mind refused to rest. Every detail of the afternoon replayed in my head: the sharp sting of her hand, the gasps of her friends, Aldrich's horrified expression, and Dorian's quiet but piercing gaze. I knew then that life had just handed me a choice. I could spiral into resentment and bitterness, or I could transform that moment into a lesson that would carry me far beyond Maple Bridge. The next morning, Marceline acted as if nothing had happened. She wore her calm, polished. Aldrich, still unaware of the full truth, tried to mediate, saying things like, "Mom, maybe it really was an accident," and I forced a weak smile, nodding because I wasn't ready to confront the storm yet. I realized then that survival in this house meant patience, observation, and discretion. That's how women like me endure. That's how we turn betrayal into wisdom. Over the following weeks, I noticed subtle shifts in behavior. Marceline tried to assert control in every interaction, trying to paint me as the difficult mother-in-law. She would whisper to Aldrich about my interference in their lives, about how I supposedly embarrassed her or undermined her authority. But I noticed something else too. Her friends, the same women who had watched the slap, began to avoid her, whispering amongst themselves and casting quick glances toward me. I realized that witnesses have power, and power doesn't lie in confrontation, it lies in quiet observation. I started documenting everything. Every slight, every manipulation, every false narrative. I wasn't doing it for revenge, at least, not yet. I was doing it for myself, to remember, to hold on to clarity, because betrayal tends to blur reality, make you question yourself, and if you don't anchor yourself, you can lose your mind. The act of writing became a form of armor. Every page, every sentence, reinforced my resolve that I would not crumble. I would not become a cautionary tale of someone who tolerated humiliation. Dorian continued to be a quiet presence in my life. We crossed paths at the grocery store, at the neighborhood market, and once at a local coffee shop where he nodded at me with that same gentle seriousness that seemed to say, "I know. I see everything." I realized then that allies don't always wear banners or make grand gestures. Sometimes, their quiet attention is enough to start turning the tide. I began to feel a subtle shift inside me. I could channel my outrage, my humiliation, into something productive, something that would ultimately teach everyone involved a lesson in consequences without me having to raise my voice. Marceline made a fatal error one evening. She called Aldrich away for an important work dinner and invited her friends over again. This time, I didn't stay passive. I greeted her friends politely, smiled warmly, complimented their homes and outfits, and let them see the calm dignity I carried despite her attempts to provoke me. I watched the way their eyes softened toward me, the way Marceline's lips pressed into a thin line. That night, I realized something crucial: dignity, patience, and consistency can dismantle arrogance far more effectively than any outburst or confrontation ever could. But the real turning point came when Aldrich, oblivious to the manipulations around him, began to sense the subtle patterns. He noticed his mother's meticulous notes, the way I gently corrected small misrepresentations from Marceline, the way I navigated social interactions with quiet composure. One evening, he asked me gently, "Mom, are you keeping track of all this?" I looked at him and nodded, letting a small, knowing smile escape. He didn't question why. He had always trusted my instincts. And that trust, built over decades, would be more valuable than any proof, any confrontation. The months that followed were a slow dance of observation and subtle influence. I volunteered for community events, helped neighbors in ways that didn't draw attention to myself, and slowly became a respected figure in Maplebridge again. Marceline, on the other hand, began to show cracks. Her manipulations became transparent. The lesson here was clear: betrayal might hit hard, but wisdom, resilience, and patience hit back even harder. Then came the moment of poetic justice. It was during a neighborhood gala, an annual event that Marceline always tried to dominate. She wore her most expensive gown, flaunted a borrowed necklace that had belonged to her mother, and carried herself with a practiced superiority. I entered quietly, in a simple dress, with a calm smile. Everyone's attention inevitably gravitated toward her, but whispers began to circulate. Guests who had seen past her arrogance discreetly began sharing small stories of her manipulations, her unkind words, her slaps of cruelty veiled behind smiles. By the end of the night, Marceline's carefully curated image had crumbled. And through it all, I remained serene, observing silently, letting truth speak louder than any accusation I could make. Aldrich eventually understood fully, and we had a long, quiet conversation. He apologized for the years he had been blind, for the times he had trusted appearances over reality. I forgave him because forgiveness is not weakness, it is the wisdom of someone who knows that clinging to anger only prolongs suffering. Marceline, on the other hand, learned a harsh lesson: people see through masks eventually. She faced the consequences of her arrogance and cruelty not through my actions alone, but through the natural alignment of truth, observation, and moral clarity. It was poetic justice, quiet, inevitable, and profoundly satisfying. Looking back now, I understand that the slap was not the end of my story, it was the catalyst. It forced me to awaken, to reclaim my dignity, and to understand that betrayal is not about being hurt, it's about learning how to navigate the world with sharper instincts and deeper empathy. I realized that every lesson in life, no matter how painful, contributes to the armor we wear and the wisdom we carry. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is not anger, it's the silent, deliberate, and unstoppable rise of a person who refuses to be diminished. If you're watching this, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Because this story isn't just mine, it's for anyone who has ever been humiliated, betrayed, or underestimated. It's for the women who feel small, for the men who have been misled, and for everyone who needs to know that resilience, wisdom, and patience can transform the deepest pain into lasting triumph. The months following the slap became a period of careful observation, quiet maneuvering, and subtle influence. I spent my mornings tending to my small garden, each plant a symbol of patience, each bloom a reminder that growth is never instant but inevitable. While I watered the roses and trimmed the hedges, I reflected on my life, the years of love, loss, mistakes, and triumphs. And I realized something crucial: betrayal is never a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of someone else's inability to see it. Aldrich had become more attentive. He began noticing the subtle ways Marceline attempted to manipulate our social circles, twist narratives, and diminish my presence in the family. He didn't yet see the full scope, but his instincts were waking, and I silently encouraged them. It wasn't my battle to fight directly, it was my lesson to teach, indirectly, through patience, strategy, and demonstration of integrity. I knew that when the time came, the truth would shine brighter than any argument I could make. One evening, Marceline made another critical error. She invited a group of our neighbors over for dinner, intending to showcase her dominance, charm, and control over Aldrich's family. This time, I had anticipated her plan. I arrived early, preparing small dishes of my own, casually engaging in conversation with her friends before she even appeared. By the time Marceline entered, the atmosphere had already shifted. Her carefully rehearsed charm met genuine warmth, her subtle manipulations met quiet resistance, and for the first time, she realized that her influence over people was fragile, even fleeting. Her face betrayed her panic for the briefest moment, but she quickly masked it with a practiced smile. I didn't react. I let the silence, the calm, and the dignity I carried speak for me. There was a lesson in that silence that she would never understand. You cannot break someone who knows their worth and chooses not to react. In the following weeks, the tension between us intensified, though I kept my composure. Marceline's attempts to control Aldrich, his friends, and even the community only highlighted her insecurities. I noticed her friends quietly gravitating toward me, seeking my advice or subtly questioning Marceline's actions. Word of her aggression during that infamous tea party had quietly traveled, and suddenly, the very social power she relied upon was eroding. I didn't spread rumors, I didn't retaliate, I simply continued living with integrity, letting the natural consequences of her behavior unfold. Aldrich finally confronted her privately after noticing the strain in relationships and the subtle changes in the way neighbors and colleagues treated her. His words to her were firm, clear, and undeniable. Marceline, your actions have consequences. You cannot treat my mother, or anyone, with disrespect and expect the world to ignore it. The weight of his voice, combined with the awareness that the community was observing, seemed to finally penetrate her facade. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not because I reveled in her discomfort, but because justice doesn't need to be loud. During this period, Dorian became an unexpected ally. He didn't intervene overtly, but his subtle gestures, bringing over freshly baked treats, sharing quiet words of encouragement, and simply being a witness to my resilience, reinforced the truth. There are always people who see clearly, even when others are blind. He reminded me that you don't need to fight every battle, especially when the battlefield is built on lies and vanity. Timing, strategy, and patience are far more effective. Marceline tried one final, desperate ploy to regain control. She attempted to manipulate Aldrich into questioning my loyalty, suggesting that I was trying to turn the community against her, that I was orchestrating a campaign to ruin her image. But Aldrich, having observed the subtle patterns of her behavior, rejected her manipulation outright. He began seeing the truth in my calm, consistent actions and the wisdom that only experience could provide. He finally realized that true strength doesn't come from aggression, charm, or social influence. It comes from integrity, patience, and quiet resilience. The breaking point came during the annual Maplebridge Charity Gala. Marceline had planned this event meticulously, intending to showcase her influence and social grace. She wore her most elaborate gown, her smile polished and practiced. I attended simply, wearing a modest dress, carrying myself with calm dignity, and letting the natural confidence of experience speak louder than any embellishment. Guests noticed. Whispers began circulating about Marceline's past misdeeds, her manipulations, and her aggressive behavior. Her carefully constructed image crumbled quietly, irreversibly, under the weight of truth and observation. As the night progressed, I found myself standing quietly by the refreshments, observing the unraveling. Marceline's attempts to regain composure became transparent, her interactions forced and shallow. Meanwhile, those who had once flattered her out of fear or ambition began gravitating toward genuine warmth and integrity, toward me. By the end of the night, her dominance had evaporated, replaced by a quiet, undeniable acknowledgement of her failings. By the end of the night, her dominance had evaporated, replaced by a quiet, undeniable acknowledgement of her failings. It was poetic justice, not a loud confrontation, but a natural, unavoidable consequence. The days following the gala solidified the transformation. Marceline's influence waned, her arrogance and attempts at control became isolated, and her social sphere began to reject her subtle manipulations. Aldrich finally expressed his gratitude for my patience, wisdom, and quiet guidance. He acknowledged that, despite years of blindness, he now understood the depth of betrayal and the power of integrity. I forgave him, knowing that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the strength to release the burden of anger and allow wisdom to guide future decisions. I reflected on everything I had learned, that betrayal is never about weakness, but about perception, that patience and observation can dismantle arrogance more effectively than confrontation, and that true revenge is not about hurting someone, but about rising beyond their attempts to diminish you. Every moment of pain, humiliation, and struggle had taught me a lesson, each contributing to the resilience, dignity, and wisdom that now defined my life. And I realized that the slap, the humiliation, the silent suffering, they were not endings. They were catalysts, pushing me to reclaim power, demonstrate integrity, and allow truth to naturally unfold. The poetic justice I experienced wasn't in a single act of retaliation, it was in the quiet, inevitable alignment of consequences that revealed the strength of character over the fleeting power of arrogance and manipulation. If you're watching this, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Because this story isn't just mine, it's for anyone who has been humiliated, betrayed, or underestimated. It's proof that patience, wisdom, and integrity transform pain into power and humiliation into strength. Life's lessons, no matter how harsh, can shape us into people capable of quiet, unstoppable triumph. By the time the next few months passed, I could feel a subtle, undeniable shift in the dynamics of our family and our community. Marceline, once so meticulously polished and seemingly untouchable, was now navigating the world with careful uncertainty. Her friends no longer flocked to her side with admiration, and her social power diminished with each passing day. It wasn't because I had sought to destroy her, it was because life has a way of balancing itself, revealing truth through patience and observation. I had merely stayed true to myself, living with integrity, letting natural consequences do their work. Aldrich became more attentive, more thoughtful, and more appreciative of the life lessons I had silently instilled in him over the years. Our conversations, once casual and distracted, now carried depth. He asked questions about judgment, about resilience, and about the strength it takes to rise when others seek to tear you down. I shared my truths, my mistakes, and the wisdom I had gathered through decades of experience. I told him that betrayal is inevitable at some point, but your response determines whether it destroys you or refines you. It was during one quiet Sunday morning that I truly felt the culmination of everything. The family gathered for brunch, a simple occasion that had once been overshadowed by tension. Marceline entered, attempting her usual air of superiority, but it no longer had the same effect. The room subtly shifted, her words, once commanding, now felt hollow. She tried to assert herself, but those around her, friends, neighbors, even our children, had begun to see her differently. I watched her realization unfold quietly, like a storm breaking apart in slow motion. I did not gloat. I never wanted that. My satisfaction came from knowing that justice had been served through natural means, through integrity, resilience, and truth. The same values I had held on to had restored balance, and Marceline's awareness of her isolation became a silent acknowledgement of the wrongs she had committed. She learned the most important lesson of all: respect is never commanded through force, intimidation, or aggression. It is earned, and it can be lost in a heartbeat when dishonesty or cruelty guides your actions. Through it all, I rebuilt my life with renewed focus. I volunteered in the community, mentored younger women navigating complex family dynamics, and took up new skills that I had always postponed: painting, writing, even small business projects that allowed me to contribute meaningfully while remaining independent. I realized that life does not end at betrayal. It transforms into opportunity for growth, self-discovery, and empowerment. My resilience became my statement, louder than any confrontation, more enduring than any insult, and infinitely more powerful than any attempt to humiliate me. There were moments of quiet reflection when I thought about the slap, the humiliation, and the years of subtle manipulation I had endured. But instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons, for the strength I had discovered, and for the clarity that comes from enduring hardship and emerging wiser. I realized that my life's journey, complete with betrayal and hardship, had prepared me to guide others, to demonstrate that no one is ever too old, too small, or too overlooked to rise and reclaim dignity. The final moment of poetic justice unfolded not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet acknowledgement from the community, my family, and even Marceline herself. She approached me one afternoon, timid and uncertain, and said, "Serafina, I realize now how wrong I was. I see what I've lost." I could have responded with scorn, with a harsh reminder of every humiliation she had caused, but instead, I smiled gently and replied, "Acknowledgement is the first step. Now, it's time to learn respect." That's how we all move forward. The power of that response was more profound than any retaliation could have been. It was wisdom, patience, and strength demonstrated without malice. Looking back, I can say with certainty that every moment of suffering, every insult, and every act of betrayal was a lesson carefully crafted by life. The slap, which once felt like the end of my dignity, became the beginning of my awakening. The humiliation I endured transformed into an opportunity to teach, guide, and rise. Aldrich witnessed it, the community witnessed it, and in my own heart, I witnessed the growth of a woman who refused to be diminished. To anyone watching this, I say, betrayal does not define you, humiliation does not break you, and age does not limit your strength. Every lesson, every struggle, and every challenge is preparing you for a moment of quiet triumph. You don't need to shout, strike, or manipulate. You need patience, integrity, and the courage to continue living your truth. These are the weapons that turn betrayal into wisdom and humiliation into power. If you're watching this, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let it remind you that life's challenges are not punishments, they are the forge that strengthens character. Every trial, every heartbreak, every moment of doubt can become the stepping stone to your own poetic justice. I am Serafina Hale, and I have lived this story. I have endured the betrayal, navigated the manipulation, and emerged wiser, stronger, and unbroken. And if there is one truth I want you to carry with you, it is this: life will challenge you, people will test you, and betrayal may sting, but the way you rise after every fall is the story that defines you. Because at the end of the day, the quiet triumph of integrity, patience, and wisdom is more powerful than any slap, any insult, or any attempt to diminish you.